I had a second cousin one time that was going to go to State University in a very small town, but he's wanted to be an electrical engineer. And I said, I want you to see how many Fortune 500 companies are within a 200-mile radius of that campus. And he paused and he says, you know the answer to that? And I said, yeah, I do, one. I said, you better come here because you want to live in Dallas? Then I hope by the time all of our students are hired, there's still room for you.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another exciting broadcast of Capital Title Connects. It's my honor and privilege to welcome today the esteemed Dr. Gerald Turner, President of SMU. Welcome, Dr. Turner.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
It's so exciting. You know, I've spoken with a number of people, SMU graduates out in the community, and somehow they found out about the fact that we would be having a podcast with you.
Good.
And they have basically stated that they haven't necessarily looked at the other podcasts, but they're for sure going to catch this one.
Well, good.
So we're excited about what you will bring to us this morning.
All right.
Just to get going, why don't you give, for some of the people who may not know, a little of your background. Where were you born, and some of your mile markers along the way?
I was born in Atlanta, Texas, over in northeast Texas, but my parents had already moved to New Boston, Texas, and my mother was just under the care of a doctor there. So when people say that I'm a native of Atlanta, Texas, the people in Atlanta say, we never heard of him. And I was a resident there for about 2 days, I think. So I grew up in New Boston. My dad was a junior high principal, and my mother was a school teacher. And so in a very real way, I'm in the family business. And
you are?
Went to, in a small town, you play every sport. And so I hoped to come to SMU on a basketball scholarship, but I was 6'2" in the 8th grade and made a forward, and I was 6'2" when I was a senior. And so there are not many 6'2" forwards around. So I played junior college basketball 2 years, and then had a knee injury and went on to Abilene Christian, and that's where I met my wife, Gail. And then we went to UT Austin. I got my master's and PhD. And then after that, to Pepperdine, OU, Ole Miss, and to SMU. So I always say we were in exile for 20 years, but we finally got back here.
Well, I know that you spent some time in a leadership position at Ole Miss.
Right.
And so how did SMU find out that you might come back and lead this prestigious university?
Well, every time a university goes to hire an executive, a particular president, you always have an executive search firm. And this particular firm had been contacting me for some time, and I really wasn't ready to leave. And so when in fact, I told him, unless 2 or 3 jobs that I gave him to him at the top of that list was SMU, unless they come open, don't bother me. And Ken Pye, who was my predecessor, was a friend of mine. In fact, I visited SMU to visit him one time. And when he passed away due to cancer, then I knew the position was open. And so just as a part of the whole process, I was one of those being considered and fortunately was selected.
Well, it's fortunate for the Dallas business community and for SMU that they did. Well, what are the events and circumstances along the way that have helped to make Dr. Turner the man that leads the institution and works and coordinates with the students today?
Well, I think my dad being a principal got me started, because there are a lot of times when issues come up, that I can hear his lecture to me on something or remember something that he had done or said. And then at Pepperdine, I met the president there named Bill Shaddock, and he then became president at OU. And really what started my career was at 33, he wanted me to come and be his chief of staff, which is vice president for executive affairs. And so I did that for 5 years, and then Ole Miss needed somebody that was different and was not from there. They needed sort of a change agent, and I was 38, but the guy who I replaced had been ill, and the enrollment had dropped and a few other things. And so they basically recruited me to come there, and I'd never been over there, so I learned a lot and they learned a lot, but it was an interesting and I think meaningful period of service. But nevertheless, I guess in terms of who were my mentors, I'd say my dad and then Bill Benoski when I was with him at Oklahoma, because being in his office, the president's office, and his being an external president, I really learned everything you could know about a university. So by the time I got ready to be a president or chancellor, well, then I'd already done it. And I had a very unique set of opportunities.
So what would you say that your dad, some recurring themes that come up in your life that you know were important to your dad that sort of resonate with you on a regular basis? What are those themes?
I was kind of hot-tempered when I was growing up, and one of the principles my dad instilled that I still can hear him say is that in a tough situation, Gerald, anybody can lose their head. It takes a real adult to stay cool and get the problem solved. And that has helped me a lot. And other times, when people come in all upset, it's not your problem, it's their problem, they're upset. And if you can stay calm, you can resolve the problem. And,
yes.
And obviously, in a small town where you're a junior high principal, I saw those kind of behaviors displayed a lot, because people felt comfortable to come into our house if they were upset, or whatever else. And so my brother and I a couple of times had to puff up like we were going to protect him if anybody tried to do anything. And so there are just a lot of things that you learn that you overtly know you're learning, but there are other things you don't know you've learned them until a situation arises that's very much like what you saw, and so the values and exactly the approach that he took, you get to see. And like everybody that has a very influential mother, you hear her too.
Yes. Well, I certainly hear my mother. Yeah. What about your mother? What are the things that resonate with you from her?
Well, generally, I think her approach to everything was that you need to be thorough, you need to do it right, you need to have a great sense of the fact that just because others do something you don't need to, and those kinds of things. She was a very religious woman, and I think that's where a lot of my continued interest in Christianity and religion in general comes from. It's just the strong influence that she had.
Well, I know that I would say is I might be way off the highway, but I'll tell you I had a really good mother.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, no matter how far I get off the highway, I know where the center of the road. I know where I know where the lane of the traffic is. Yeah. And maybe not today, maybe not that afternoon, and maybe not an hour from when I find myself, but ultimately I always find a way to get back in the lane.
Yeah. And that's something you want to make sure your children know. And it's some of those values and so on I try to communicate to the students here, that in this time in which everybody is rude and everybody wants to shout down everyone else and everybody wants to be as assertive as possible, then these are fellow human beings and they need to be heard, they need to hear you, and so on. So it's a very difficult time to try to make sure that the self-respect that you were taught growing up and the respect for others that you were taught growing up maintains itself in the public. Because, again, now it's very challenging to try to make sure that the kinds of values that a university has and has always had, but should have even in difficult times, carries forward.
And how do these values, what you would call the religious values, it seems like many schools, including Yale and Harvard, were originally schools which were designed to teach pastors and preachers, and had certainly, like Duke University, had a religious precept as part of the founding of the university. I won't give my opinion, but I'll say it wouldn't be a bad idea for them to check back on the original records and find out, in fact, why they are there. That would just be my opinion. But how would you say the religious beliefs that you have influence you and in your work here at the university?
Well, I think that universities that started off associated with a particular church or something like that, a lot of the split came in terms of only having a particular point of view, and there's always been tension between some of the, I think, misunderstandings of religion and individuals in the academy and in science and so on. My view is that those two are just further explanations of what reality is, and there doesn't have to be a tension between them, but nevertheless, over time, there certainly has been. And one of the things that I like the most about SMU and that attracted me here and certainly has helped keep me here because I want to reinforce it, and that is that this is a real university. And so I've got faculty who are atheists, faculty that have every religion in the world, and as well as Methodists and other Christians. And so what I want SMU to be is a place where religion is still on the agenda, that it can still be talked about. Spiritual issues are relevant conversations. And if you don't believe, if you come to a conclusion that you don't, well, then that's fine. But, well, it's not really fine, but that's acceptable. And that's part of a university. It's like I tell people all the time. They'll say, well, why don't you do this or why don't you do that? Shut this person up or that. And I'll say, it's a real university. And that means all points of view are capable of being expressed and certainly are held by the community here. But the point being that religious concepts, religious issues, religious debates that involved real basic questions of humanity are still a part of the dialogue. And to me, that's what a university that has a religious background ought to be, that it ought to be an open forum on whatever issues there are out there, but seen from a Christian perspective, but not uniquely or only from a Christian perspective.
Well, you know, the rocks that you go back to, they pretty well will withstand whatever arguments are made or discussions are had. I don't think, we talked briefly before we did this about the fact that you actually give a sermon at the campus church, Home Park Methodist Church here, and I think that's a great idea. That keeps you connected.
Well, it does with that church. Mark Craig and I got here at the same time, June of '95, and we were talking about the relationship between the university and the church. I mean, the university gave that land for the church to be there, and I think it's very important that it serve not only the broader city of Dallas and so on, but also serve the community, and that there be a good working relationship between the university and the church. Over time, sometimes there gets to be some tension or so on. And so he knew that I spoke, because I did it in Mississippi, any place, give me a pulpit and I'll be there. And so he said, well, why don't we start a tradition? And so we did that for all the time that Mark was the minister. And so it really has kind of served its purpose, and that is to remind people at that church particularly that there's a great relationship between the university and that church, and no matter how irritated they may get with some of us, that historical relationship needs to be there, and the church informs the university and the university informs the church, but we share facilities on a lot of things, parking garages and so on. So it's a great relationship now. I'm very proud of how the university and Highland Park United Methodist Church do interact in very important ways, not only with the Perkins School of Theology, but with the campus as a whole.
Well, one thing I want to know about SMU is what do you perceive to be the unique mission of SMU in Dallas and North Texas and really beyond?
Yeah.
You have graduates and influence that extend, frankly, worldwide.
Right. When I got here in '95, the board trustees said what we really want is for SMU to become a more nationally recognized and distinguished university. And I said, well, there are several things that are required for that. I mean, a university is really faculty and students, but you've got to have good facilities and those kinds of things to get them. But if you really want to get good, we can't get bigger. And so we are, until we get to the level we want. And so we're exactly the same size that we were when I got here in '95, but our admission standards have gone from like the 75th centile to now we're the 95th centile, to where it's very hard for people who got here maybe 15 years ago with certain scores to realize that those won't get you in now. And so and we have faculty more and more that are nationally distinguished, and that's what makes a great university. And so our rankings have gone up, and so on. But the whole part of that, though, needs to be within the context that's uniquely SMU, and that is, I say our corporate culture is the corporate culture of Dallas, and that is positive, up and at 'em, interactive, all those kinds of things that I think define the best of Dallas. Opportunity, merit-based promotion kinds of situations. That's what we want to be about, and I think that's why a lot of Dallas firms, of course, certainly hire our students, but a lot of national firms now are starting to come in here on a regular basis. I know one major one that only interviews 5 universities, and we're one of those 5. And so we want to reflect, I want to hear that our students are well educated, that they have great social skills, and they have great cultural skills. We're working on something called cultural intelligence to try to make sure in this world in which it's so diverse and people from all over the earth are in every business and situation, that our graduates have the knowledge, capability, and understanding to interact with people from whatever background. And so all of that, I think, comes together to say we want to reflect the very positive, merit-based, up and at 'em attitude of Dallas on this campus. And I think generally we do a pretty good job of that.
I think you do. As a graduate, I would say I think you do. I think
thank you.
I think some of the professors that I had here in the Cox School of Business, I can imagine them, and they were successful outside. They were not just teachers.
Right, consultants and so on.
They were actually making it in a real sense outside of their university duties.
Yeah.
I thought that was very important.
Yeah.
It helped to give me a level of respect for the individuals. I was thinking, I better listen to this guy. He's actually done it.
Well, and the other thing that Dallas does for us is it gives great internship opportunities. Our students generally have jobs before they leave here, and they come from, no matter whether you're in fine arts administration or business or engineering or whatever your interests are, there are internship opportunities where you can go out and work and see if that's what you want to do. Is that the environment you want to work in? Is that the kind of business you want to operate or whatever else? And also to work with a lot of entrepreneurial kind of people. And so that gives our students a huge advantage over students that go to universities in small towns. I mean, there are benefits to going to a university in a small town, but they certainly don't come from internships and opportunities like we have. I had a second cousin one time that was going to go to a state university in a very small town, but he's wanted to be an electrical engineer. And I said, I want you to see how many Fortune 500 companies are within a 200-mile radius of that campus. And he paused and he says, you know the answer to that? I said, yeah, I do, one. I said, you better come here because you want to live in Dallas? Then I hope by the time all of our students are hired, there's still room for you. And he ended up coming here and had a great career.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was in the MBA program, I was here before long. I was the moderator of Real Estate Today TV show. Mm-hmm. Didn't know that was in my background somewhere.
Yeah.
Here I'm back.
Yeah.
And Dr. Sid Regan, I don't know if you recall him. Mm-hmm. We'd say we want an internship, and he'd kind of listen to you, and he'd get on the phone, and by the next day, you had an internship, and you might work there 6 weeks, which was just perfect because you could go through multiple prestigious firms and real estate firms that helped you to meet and see what was going on out.
Whether that's what you wanted to do and how well you did it, and then so often jobs come from those internships, and so it really does provide a huge benefit for our students over those from, again, some universities in small towns.
What do you think that SMU does uniquely well?
Well, I think, let me answer that in a different way. I'm going to say what we're working on very hard, and that is to try to make sure our students have more than one major, or if they have only one major, have a major and several minors, because we are very much trying to do cross-disciplinary things because so many jobs in the world now are evolving, and so we want our students, our graduates, to be able to evolve with them, and that may mean they need some technology background, that may mean they need some Spanish or Chinese or some other language, and so I think we can uniquely give our students opportunities to broaden what their educational background may be. We have a lot of students that graduate with joint degrees in engineering and fine arts.
That's
well,
awesome.
Big state universities, you can't do that. I mean, they're just not equipped to be able to handle that. And so what we try to provide our students is an opportunity to really broaden what their educational background might be within all the contexts that we've talked about. And we have unique programs, like the digital games program, the Guildhall we call it, which is usually the top one or maybe the second one in the country. And we have a lot of other kinds of programs in fine arts, business, and engineering that are fairly unique. But I think the main thing we're trying to get our students to do is to broaden what they come in here with. And so when incoming students meet 10 or 12 advising students, and they start saying, well, I'm a double major in this, that, and the other, I'm a major in triple minor in these things, and all the students are going, oh man, am I in the right place? I can't do that. And I get up and tell them they felt the same way you did when they were in your place, and so it'll evolve. And so I'm very excited about our work in cross-disciplinary things and trying to bring digital and technological components into everywhere from the humanities to engineering and physics and so on, where they naturally reside.
Well, I'll tell you something as a former student, and as a parent and as an uncle. Families get schools and universities like SMU get your blood, as they would say.
Good.
Is experiences like a great university, but my niece was involved in the English department. She was quite interested. And the teacher, on pleasant days or nice days, she said would take them outside, and they would have their lecture or whatever outside English.
Yeah.
In other words, one thing that don't forget that SMU brings great academics and great experiences on a personal basis and helps to make people like me feel special.
Yeah. Well, if you look in the spring, there'll be a lot of classes held out on the main quad. You can see people around, faculty, and so on. But part of that, too, is that we're one of the most beautiful campuses in the world. And so I always tell people that academic quality is why they should come here, but what ensures them that it's the right choice is just the fact that the campus is one of the most attractive in the country. And as I always say, that life's too short to go to college on an ugly campus. And so you might as well enjoy this one.
Let me ask you this. There's some people here that I know that there will be SMU graduates, and I think there's some thought that SMU enjoys quite a prestigious reputation in their alumni, but what is it that you need from SMU alumni? What would you most like to say if you're in the Dallas business community or you're an SMU alumni? What can you do to help this university?
Well, an easy answer to that is contribute.
Yes.
And as a private institution, that has to be a part of it. But also being involved in programs, talking about things, helping with scholarships for students who can't afford to come here, and provide mentorships, internships. One of the things that brings a lot of people here is just the fact that they know if they graduate within a certain cohort of students, that's probably who they're going to be in business with and various other kinds of things throughout their time. A lot of our theater students work together after they graduate. There's a whole group in Seattle, a whole group in Chicago that have started theaters, but they're working together. And just like people in real estate that create companies, but 4 or 5 of them were all here together at one time. And so the SMU family and the SMU contact base is an important thing to a lot of people of why they want to come here. And so we really need to make sure that people provide those opportunities for current students like they were provided.
I agree, but someone sitting out there today that's going to be looking at this show and going, well, that sounds well and good. how do I get involved? No one's calling me, or maybe a student calls irreliably on the annual fund. How would somebody go about reaching out, or what would you suggest they do?
Well, there's an office for the Alumni Association or Alumni Board. And that office, when we learn that people are interested in being involved, we give them their names and they start working with them on various projects. It could be events in their neighborhood, like if they're in Plano or Frisco, to where they have something. Right now, we've got a lot of alums hosting going away parties. And these are people that live around the country, but I know in LA, for example, there have been several that would have about 20 students that they would invite to their house with their parents, and it's sort of a going away party coming to SMU. But that gets around, and the word that SMU is really reaching out, and they're getting organized early and so on, and they've got those parents and alumni helping with it. And so there are all kinds of ways to do it. But if you check with the alumni office, they will get you involved.
So let me ask you this. Some people perceive that, well, I'm sure that if it needs to be done, it's being done, and surely there's plenty of volunteers and stuff like that. But is that really the case, or do you need some of the people here to make help?
We always need more people involved with it, and particularly when it comes to recruiting. Recruiting is getting to be incredibly intense because everybody wants the best students, and now that we've moved up in the pecking order, we're competing now with Vanderbilt and Duke and those kind of institutions, and which have bigger endowments than we do, and so on. And so to pull a student from one of those institutions, like I said, when you're at the 95th centile, you're in some pretty rare air. And so the intensity of recruiting is greater. And so people in schools, people that can do small scholarships, all kinds of things, can help us in that battle, because it really is intense. The top 5% of students, top 10% of students in the country, with birth rates and everything else, is not growing.
Yes.
And so the pie is about the same. And so those of us that are moving into that group, those that are already there, are trying to kick us out. And so as I tell somebody, if you take a high ACT score and a high GPA score, that kid's going to be recruited like an outstanding quarterback. I mean, it gets very intense. And so we need our alums out there helping us.
What's your best advice to young people?
When students come in, I tell them, you need to get a broad education to understand humanity, because you're going to be working with them. And that's the liberal arts and so on. And we haven't changed much on that.
Yes.
Get a great education in humanities. Get a good, strong basis in some kind of technology so that you are comfortable with that as it comes along. Have your one basic interest, but have a lot of others. And make sure you're not monolingual. People my age that only speak English and remember a little bit back from high school or college days really are handicapped, because there are so many young people now that speak 4 or 5 languages. And Americans need to for sure speak Spanish and think about speaking Chinese as well as French and the other things that have some attraction. But don't just stay tied to one language. I think that really does limit your ability. And so a lot of our students are taking Chinese, Arabic, and various other kinds of things. The world's getting so much smaller. You've really got to be able to work with people, whatever their race, background, religion, and so on, if you're going to be successful, because you can't be successful by yourself.
One man is no man. I've heard that statement made before. And any life lessons that you want to pass along that you've learned along the way to young people and others? Any life lessons that you would like to just?
I tell all first-year students when they come in, I say, the first semester is the hardest semester because you're adapting to so many things and so on. And I'd urge you to do 2 things, and I really hammer this to them. 1, remember why you're here, that you came here to get an education, not just a party. If you just came here to party, you'll last 3 months, 4 months, and then we'll send you home. But why you came here and who you are, and what your values are, what your ideas are, and so on. I heard Henry Kissinger say 40 years ago. Somebody said, how do you develop your philosophy of international affairs and foreign affairs now that you're Secretary of State? When do you do that? And his statement was, if you don't have that worked out and clearly know what you value, it's too late, because you're not going to have time here. And so I tell students, you've got time, so make sure you know who you are.
Grow as a
why
person.
You came here. Yeah, why you came here. Your parents have taught you things, you know good things, you're going to learn a lot of things, but remember who you are, and you know, and don't stay static. You've got to grow as a person, as you say, but why you came here and who you are. If you keep those two things in mind, you'll do okay.
Well, that's great. Well, it's been obviously an honor and a privilege to welcome you here today.
You.
I know
Good to visit with
that
you.
I look forward to greeting many people on our podcast that'll watch this, and so I want to thank each of you for joining us today for another exciting edition of Capital Title Connects. And don't forget, we're on Facebook, Spotify, iTunes, and Podbean. Now that's some of the technology we're talking about.
Yeah.
You can catch us there, and I guarantee you, people will catch us on all of those different sources. So until we meet again, thanks and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed
Appreciate it very much.